where we deal with squares, cubes, square roots and cube roots. Now let us learn about square numbers. Now what are square numbers? Square numbers are products that you get by multiplying a number by itself, an integer by itself. So let me take an example. Say suppose I take 6. 6 multiplied by 6 gives me 36. Now 36 is a square number. Now what about negative 6 multiplied by negative 6? That also gives me 36, and 36 is a square number. It's also called a perfect square. 36 is a perfect square. And the 6 is called the square root of 36. Is called a square root of 36. Now what about minus 6? Minus 6 is another root as well. So 36 has two square roots. So the square roots of 36 are 6 and minus 6. However, when I use this sign, which is called the radical sign, if this radical sign is used, if this is employed, then we take only the positive square root. 6 is the positive square root, negative 6 is the negative, it is the negative square root. But when this radical symbol is used by convention, we only consider the positive square root. So that you'll have to remember. Alright, so let us write some squares, perfect squares starting with 1. So 1 squared, 1 times 1, which also written as 1 power 2, 1 raised to 2 is 1. Now 2 times 2 is 2 squared, and you know that it is 4. So you can list out the first 10 square numbers. Can you do that? The first square number, of course, is 1. Then the second one is 4. The third one, 3 squared, is 9. What's 4 squared? 16. 5 squared, 5 times 5, 25. And 6 squared we just saw, 36. Continuing, 7 squared, 49. 8 squared, 64. 9 squared, 81. And 10 squared is 100. Now you can continue this, but we are just looking at the first 10 square numbers for now. Now you know so when I write square root of 81, you just have to say 9. But when I ask you, what is the square root? When I put it in words like this, what is the square root of 81? Then you will have to give me the two answers, 9 and negative 9, both. You get it? So when it is asked in words, you give both the positive and negative square roots, whereas when the radical sign is used, you just give the positive square root. Now what about now why is it called square numbers? Now you can see, consider this square, and let us take that this is 9 centimeter by 9 centimeter, and the area is 81 centimeters. So the square number 81 can be represented as 81 centimeters squared. The area is 81 centimeters squared, and the sides of this square is 9 centimeter by 9 centimeter. So a square number can be represented in the form of a square. Now supposing this the side is say 13 and the area would be 169 because 13 times 13 is 169. So here you have a square whose area is 169 square units. So that's why it gets its name. The perfect squares get the name square numbers because they can be represented as area of a square. Now what about cube numbers? What are cube numbers? You just extend it. A number multiplied 3 times, an integer multiplied 3 times. You get a cube number. So for example, 4 multiplied by 4 multiplied by 4 gives you 64. And 64 is a cube number. Now what about negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4? It's minus 64. You know that minus 4 into minus 4 is positive 16. Positive 16 times minus 4 is minus 64. So minus 64 is also a cube number. Now did you notice that you don't have negative square numbers because even if you multiply two negatives you get only a positive answer. No, now that leads us to a very important result. When I take the cube root, now the cube root is mentioned in the radical form like this with a small 3 which is called the index, which indicates that you are taking the cube root. The cube root of 64. The cube root of 64 is 4. That means you are taking the cube root of 4 cube, which is 4. So 4 is the cube root of 64. And also you can also extract the cube root of a negative cube number, which is minus 4. So this is possible in cubes. You can take the cube root of a negative number. However, 64, you will notice that it is also a square number. So square root of 64 is 8. Whereas when I say minus 64, this is not a real number. You cannot take square root of a negative number. So this is not a real number. It doesn't come under our number system, real numbers. You will be learning about these numbers, the square root of negative numbers in your higher classes, higher grades. So we cannot take square root of negative numbers. We can take the cube root of negative number. Okay. Now you will have to list out. Now this is an exercise for you. You list out the first 10 cube numbers. Multiply the first 10 natural numbers and then you can get the first 10 multiply 3 times each individual number, multiply 3 times by itself, and then you get the first 10 cube numbers. Now let us do a small exercise on this. Let us find the square roots of these following numbers. Okay, I'm going to just ask you to get the positive square root. So I'm going to use the radical sign. I'm insisting so that you know that you are only going to take the positive square root. So what is square root of positive 121? It is square root of 11 squared and therefore you get 11. Now here you can even write 2 here, which means you are taking the square root. But we don't mention it. It is understood. If no number is mentioned beside this radical, it is 2. So that means it is square root. And the square root of 121 is square root of 11 squared, which is 11. Now what is square root of 169? It is 13. Now what is square root of a decimal now? 0.01. What do you think? I said we can, you can take the square root of this because it has 2 equal factors. What are the factors, 2 equal factors of 0.01? It is 0.1 multiplied by 0.1, which is square root of 0.1 squared, and the square root is 0.1. Now consider this was square root of 169 once again. So square root of 169 is 13. Now what is the square root of 169? I mean 16900, 16,900. You can split it up and you can write it as 169 times 100. Isn't it? 169 times 100. Now try to write this as squares. So 169 can be written as 13 squared and 100 is 10 squared. Now for each of these numbers, you can pull out the square root. So which is 13 times 10, which is 130. So the square root of 16,900 is this 130. Now what about square root of 1.69? Now I'm using the same digits 1, 6 and 9. You will notice that. Now how to get the square root of 1.69? Now you can convert it into decimal. I mean fraction, 169 divided by 100. So this can also be written as square root of 13 squared by 10 squared. Now taking the square root, extracting the square root from the radical, so it will be 13 upon 10, which is 1.3. The shorter method is when you have 1.69 and you know that 169 is a perfect square, you just see the number of decimal places after the decimal point. There are 2, and in your square root you will have half of the number of decimal digits, so it will be 1.3. So now I'm using the same 169, but I'm going to write 0.0169. Now how many digits are there after the decimal point? There are 4. And in your square root, there will be half the number, so it will be 0.13. So here you have 4 decimal places, and in your answer you have 2. Now let us try one more. Square root of 144 is 12, and then the square root of 1. Now how do we read this number? This is 1,440,000. Now 104 has square root 12, and how many zeros are there after the number 144? There are 4, and here you have 4 zeros, and in your square root you will have half the number of zeros, so it's going to be 1200. So the number of zeros after a square number reduced to half the number of zeros in the square root. So these are shortcuts which you can always use to hasten your calculations. So now 0.000144. So this is a decimal, and there are 6 digits after the decimal point, and the square root will have 3, so it will be 0.012. Here you have 6, and in your square root you have 3, exactly half the number. So you'll be wondering, what is the square root of 0.144? This is not a perfect, so you cannot extract the square root just like how we did, because there are only 3 digits. So if you use your calculator, you will see that this is an irrational number. Now you can also use graphs. When you learn graphs, you will know how to use the graph to get square roots of numbers like this. So for example, if I want to take the square root of say 30 or say even 20, it's not a perfect square number. So the square root of 20 20 lies between 16 and 25, isn't it? 20 lies between 16 and 25. I've chosen two square numbers. One is less than 20 and the other one is immediately greater than 20. Now if I take the square root of 16 is less than square root of 20 is less than square root of 25. Taking square roots for all the three. So you have here 4 less than square root of 20 is less than 5. So square root of 20, the value lies between 4 and 5. So you can use a graph to approximately find the square root of 20. Now how do you do that? You have your x-axis and the y-axis. Then you write the numbers here, say, yeah, we need 20. So 10, 5, 15 and 20 and 25. Now here the y-axis represents square root of x. That is, this is your x-axis and the y-axis represents the square root of x. Now square root of 0 is 0, the 1 will be 1, square root of 4 will be 2, and then the square root of 9 will be 3. So your graph will have a shape like this. So this point is 9, 3. 9 is the x and the root of 9 is, square root of 9 is 3. Here you have 4, 2. Then here you have 1, 1. So these are, the x values are square numbers and the y values are the square roots. Now when I just extend this graph and I can just draw this vertical line and read approximately the value. So that will lie definitely between 4 and 5. You can see what it is using the graph tree. So all these are some ways of extracting square roots for non-perfect square numbers. Now let us find out the square roots of how will you find square root of 6, 1 by 4? You can convert it into a mixed number, the improper fraction. 4 6s are 24 plus 1, 25 by 4. Now square root of 25 is 5 and square root of 4 is 2. Now let us find out cube roots now. How to get cube roots? How to get the cube root of 343? Now if you learn the first 10 cube numbers, it will be easy. When you just observe the number, you can write the cube root. If not, you will have to do the prime factorization, which will be one of the sections that we will be doing. So 343 can be divided by 7. 7 4s are 28 and 7 9s are 63. Once again divide by 7. So you can see that 343 can be expressed as 7 cube. And the cube root of 7 cube is 7. Now what is cube root of negative 8? This is cube root of minus 2, the whole cube, and hence the cube root is minus 2. What is cube root of 0.001? It's cube root of 0.1, the whole cube, and hence the answer is, the cube root is 0.1. And here again, if you have a cube number, say 27 is 3 cube, and if there are 3 zeros following next to that 27, the cube root would be cube root of 3 cubed into 1000, and 1000 is 10 cube, and when you extract the square root, it is 3 times 10, it will be 30. So for every 3 zeros, you will have 1 zero in the cube root. And similarly for every 3 decimal places, you will have 1 in the cube root, if it is possible to extract the cube root. So that brings us to the end of this lesson, cubes and cube roots. You can also have higher powers. For example, when I say 2 to the power of 5, it means you are multiplying 2 5 times, which is 32. So we will be learning about higher powers and even fractional powers in the lessons to follow.